Hello and welcome to another episode of your favorite D&D podcast, Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the ever stylish, world-traveling, convention organizing Teos Abadia. Teos, welcome back.
Thank you, Shawn. It is really nice to be here. I super enjoyed hearing Dan and Jason on the show. That was awesome. And also the really nice feedback from all the folks who liked our previous world building episode. That's been really cool to see. Like a lot of people were like, that's been my favorite episode so far, which is really cool because you were kind of like, I don't know if this is going to be good or not. And it was great.
Hey, we'll take it. We'll switch back and forth. We'll do some reviews, some world building. So tell me about the glasses you were just wearing there, sir.
So I was very lucky. Thank you, Wizards. They sent a package out to some folks, and I've somehow managed to be on this list. And I mean, just as a collector alone, I love it. I really appreciate it. And hopefully it means that they kind of recognize some of the work that I put in, such as this weekend at Emerald City Comic Con, seating thousands of players nearly, many hundreds. But yeah, they sent those glasses. They sent an ice bucket, which is superb. That's the best thing in there because it's this gold 50th anniversary logo ice bucket, which is great because I actually needed one for my gaming room that I'm setting up. Two very pretty glasses with etched design, gold trim, two gold colored wine stoppers. The idea is celebrate the 50th year anniversary. And if you know anything about marriages, 50th year anniversary is typically gold. So this is the golden anniversary, and so it was all kind of gold themed. There were two really cool coasters, so really nice. I mean, I loved it. There's always the thing where people could just go like, well, how about if I just got some cool books or some, gold foil edition book or something? But I thought this was a fun idea, and I appreciate them doing it. And I know it's part of PR and stuff, but still, I was very happy they chose me. And as luck would have it, the ice bucket is just perfect for me.
Hey, maybe they made it knowing exactly what you needed.
That would be no.
Speaking of exactly what you needed, you've been on a trip. You are now home and rested. How was Emerald City Comic Con?
It was amazing. I didn't know what to expect compared to PAX West. It's in the exact same building in Seattle, run by the same Reed Pop organizers for the various entities, PAX or Emerald City Comic Con. I heard a lot of things going in. One of them that I heard from a lot of the DMs that we had there at the show was, oh, this is a con where a lot of people come to play D&D. Like they know, like, yeah, I'm a D&D player. I'm coming in. That was the furthest thing from what I saw when I was there. It was more than half of the people were learn to play, super casual. And again, kind of like PAX last year, you could not identify who a D&D player would be or who would be interested in D&D by looking at them. Pick a random character in a movie from a scene, and you might go like, that's not a D&D player. But I would say to everybody, want to play a 30-minute game of D&D? And that person, whatever you're imagining as not a D&D player, would say, oh, I run a campaign at home, but let me see if I can get some of my friends that haven't tried it, and I'll, we'll join for a table. Like you couldn't peg who was a D&D player or not, or who would be curious in D&D, but tons of people were into it, and we gave lots of people their first game. It was unbelievable, and I want to see more efforts like this because I think there are too many conventions where we treat it as, oh yeah, it's just the same gang coming in. And I think there are all kinds of, clearly there are tons of players dying to try this game. A lot of it, we heard Baldur's Gate mentioned, right? The video game. But, we know there's still that residual, whether it's actual play, whether it's Stranger Things, whether it's just, but everybody knew, here's the thing. Everybody knew D&D, right? Nobody was like, what's that?
Right.
Now, of course, we are in geek circles and everything, but still, like, whether they were there for, any kind of TV property that they're into or comics or whatever, they understood what D&D was, but they might not know anything about the game. And one funny anecdotal thing, it's just one person, but there was a player who did the learn to play twice. And so coming out, I said, how do you feel about the game? And they said, I think if I play it one more time, I'll get it. Mm-hmm. It just shows you the importance of learn to play and how even that can be, you want to see it a couple times with a couple different DMs, right? It's really, I thought that was fascinating. So they played it 3 times through the 30-minute learn to play to feel comfortable. Or another person that was really anxious about everything. They played with one DM, loved that DM. They were like, what else is this DM running? And then they played 2 other adventures, a 2-hour and a 4-hour, as a brand new player, because they felt so comfortable with that one DM who put them at ease, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all those points, we could do a whole show on all those points you just made, right? How important it is to make a learn to play thing that makes people learn, that helps people learn. Because I will go on to Reddit or whatever and read, I'm a new DM running for new players. What should I run? And the things that some people come out with, right? Oh, Out of the Abyss is what you should run as a new DM with new players. I'm like, no. And
all those NPCs at the beginning.
Exactly.
I mean, so Shawn, we've got a question that maybe we should just segue right into. It's our second question thing came in just via Gene Lorber on Blue Sky, and maybe we hit that question right now.
Okay. All right, let's do it. So here we go with Gene Lorber via Blue Sky. How well does the standard published 5e adventure format function as a user manual for the DM? What features could be added and subtracted to make them better?
So how about not 40 NPCs at the beginning of the adventure?
Yeah. I think I don't know if there is a standard 5e published adventure format that is consistent.
Yeah.
It's going to depend on, this is a different question than a new DM.
Sure.
So for just a DM.
Yeah. A user's manual for a DM. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the current format serves a purpose fairly well, in the sense that what I want to see is, what is this adventure level wise? Who is it written for? How many characters of what level? And what are the themes, tones? Is it meant to be a horror? Is it meant to be a comedic adventure? Then I want the adventure background, an adventure summary in 2 paragraphs, what happens. And I think from that, depending on the game master, you may get a different thing that's needed. Some people need to know all the NPCs up front with a pronunciation guide for them to feel comfortable. I could care less, because I'm going to say it the way I want to say it. Right. And I'm not going to remember all of these NPCs in a list. I need to see them in action. So that's useless for me, but super important for someone else. So at this point, I think we're swapping out one person's strength for another person's weakness in terms of the things that are put in the adventure. What do you think?
A couple of things. One is, we reviewed a series. We spent a series of episodes where we talked about what are the intros to all of the 5e adventures, right? How do all of these start? Right. And we talked about sort of whether they are, direct or clunky or overdone. And some of them had, amazing amounts of backstory. And you're like, is this really necessary? Baldur's Gate, for example, has a lot of earnest. And so I think that, there are some things that could be better, like for sure could be done to, like you talked about, streamline that information up front so that you can get some decent amount, but it doesn't overwhelm you. I think the beginning of that beginning is so important, because you are probably, even if you've DM'd a fair amount, you're probably still trying to build up steam for your game. Scheduling is hard, right? Like, it's like everybody talks, that's like the number one enemy of the DM is scheduling. And if you start on a so-so session, that hurts, right? And so being able to have that first beginning be decent, like I think one of the reasons the starter set is very popular, the first one, Phandelver, is because it's a decent start, right? Goblin ambush, goblin cave, like you can roll with that. Almost anybody can run that and feel pretty good about it, and the players will feel pretty good about the experience. But something like Out of the Abyss is going to be highly variable with how you handle those NPCs It's going to require a ton of work on your end. It's probably going to scare you. Icewind Dale, which lead do you choose, and how does this tie into it? The separation between large story and micro story, those kinds of things. And so I think that as user manuals, one of the first things we could do is a better start, better setup, better start, actual flow charts. And then it would be advice. We seldom talk to the DM. D&D seems to have a sort of aversion from the DMG to the adventurers of giving advice and speaking to the dungeon master about the reality of the game they're running. And that's what I'd like to see more of. DM David did a good article on what adventures in the past have given this kind of advice. And they're all really good. Like his list is full of adventures that when I read them back in the day or recently, they made an impression on me and helped me moderate my game. And I think there could be more of that.
Yep, I agree. And the connections to something happening early in the adventure to later in the adventure need to be spelled out for a game master who can't prep a whole adventure ahead of time.
Yeah.
So if if at level 4 they fight this monster or NPC, and what happens there will affect what happens in a battle or in several encounters at level 8, you need to tell the game master why it's important, what to keep track of. And is it a narrative or is it a user manual?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we want to make it completely narrative, we can go one way. If we want to make it a user manual, we would need to redesign adventures from the ground up.
Yeah.
What if you're a game master who wants to run one encounter at a time and you don't want to read ahead? You're going to one way. If you're a game master who wants to mine this adventure for other things, you don't want it to be that. You want it to be something completely different. So,
I'll argue a bit. With that, Shawn, in that I think that even then, understanding the purpose of something always helps you get a grasp of it, even if you're going to rob it for parts, right? And so I think that it is important. I think any author should look at, and no exception for D&D official stuff, you should look at where do I need to clue in the DM as to what the point of this is, right? If it's a dungeon with 40 rooms, probably not every single room, but maybe the section, the floor, the level, the area, you want to explain kind of what's going on here, right? It's Temple of Animal Evil. This is the floor where all the fire cultists are, but there are numerous opportunities to show incursions from this and that other cult, and for the players to turn the tide against them through means other than battle, right? Something like that sets it up so you go, oh yeah, that's what's kind of, I should be on my toes for that, right? And then a particular encounter, some advice like, the challenge isn't in the monsters, it's in the traps. Mm-hmm. Or the fun of the encounter is in the traps. Make sure to bring them into that, right? Or start the encounter when they're inside the room because that's the way this will work. Just advice like that. That's the user manual part of it, and often critical to that experience, I think.
Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking of is like Peril in Pinebrook, where I went full user manual.
Yeah.
And many game masters, experienced game masters, would take a look at that if it was in a regular adventure. Even if I cut it back 50% to get rid of the very, very basic nitty-gritty rules, game master would be like, I already know this. Let me skip to the story because I want to mine that, or let me skip to the encounter because I want to mine that. And I mean, it would still work, but it just wouldn't be the same experience that one game master would want as opposed to another.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Shadow Dark sort of does that in a lot of the OSR adventures where they have this format of just sort of bolding certain keywords. And the theoretical idea doesn't really work with my brain particularly well, is that you're just going to glance at these things and then you just kind of riff off of them. Mm-hmm. I am definitely of the mindset that I would rather have it be the other way, where you tell me kind of what is the point of this encounter, why am I doing this, and give me a little more words and feeling, and then I may change that, but I want to properly understand what's there, and I want there to be something there. I want in general, I want an encounter to have a reason it's fun, not just two interesting features in a monster, go, right? Like orc and pie.
Yes. Well, that's a great question, Gene, to be dropped on us at the last minute, but thank you for sending that in. We have another question from Dave C via YouTube. As a fan of Dark Souls, the video game, I recognize tracking stamina and exhaustion can be a very fun element of some game experience. That requires really integrating it with the other game systems, though. Beyond the unilateral, exhaustion makes everything harder. Kind of like they tried to do with the inspiration system. Make it a currency that enables players to make meaningful decisions about spending it and suffer the drawbacks. Give more ways to help recover from it, more systemized ways of gaining exhaustion, etc. That can all be fun. It's just a lot more work. And we had this discussion with Dan and Jason about exhaustion, and we had a nice. There was on YouTube. There's a little thread, a discussion thread about this. Culminating with Dave's question here. And this is interesting. When I see this and my game design brain kicks in, what I do is remove the words and just put in like X or Y, and then try to look at this mathematically or mechanically. So when I see so I remove stamina / exhaustion. I recognize that tracking X can be a very fun element of some game experience, because what you call it doesn't matter. It's just a system that needs to work narratively, right, thematically, and mechanically. Fun, flavorful, and effing balanced, all coming together. And so when you look at it that way, exhaustion is supposed to be thematically a penalty. So if you are just making it yet another system that players can game, you are turning it from what it's meant to be thematically to just another mechanic that min-maxers will use to their benefit while minimizing the penalties.
Ah, that's really interesting.
Unless you perfectly balance it,
yeah,
which is, another 6 months of play testing with all the other things that it needs to balance with. So it's tough. Dave is right that it can be fun, but it's not even as easy as Dave makes it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you made me think a lot through what you were saying there. Because if I pull back, what's the point a lot of times for me in exhaustion? It's capturing sort of environmental things like extreme cold or heat, or representing how grueling the trek is. And sometimes it's just like a thing a monster does to you, or a trap or something, and that's okay. But there are a lot of ways we can capture that. But that whole, how best do you capture the idea that this trip might be exhausting? 4th edition did it by removing healing surges, right? Which was a perfectly functional way to do it, because you did have a use for those. They didn't always matter, but in some adventures they really did. And it was a way that a DM could actually do things so that it all, dovetailed together and worked and mattered. And so maybe just all of the exhaustion system is a bad idea, and it's less about whether it's -1 per track or it's certain things at certain tracks. Maybe it's just that this doesn't really work very well with what 5th edition is trying to do, kind of at all, right? Because it's the problem. And 5e gets into this with curses and things like that too, right? If the cleric can just wave it away, well, what was the point of it? But then if you don't have a cleric, are you absolutely, out of it? Yeah. So maybe we're just dealing with the wrong thing. Like, what if exhaustion was more like you have the exhausted condition, and a DM could decide that a skill is at disadvantage because of your exhaustion? It often won't be for normal checks, but it would be if you were doing something where that plays into, you're trying to climb a wall, or you're trying to continue your exploration, then that maybe is hindered. And maybe it would do things like limit what you get back from a rest, right? Maybe enough hit dice mean you need to spend a whole day just getting out of the exhausted state, or I don't know, there are lots of ways one can do it. I tend to think that exhaustion, while the -1, -2 playtest version we saw is better, they probably took it away because it's not quite perfect. And the question is, will they put something else in there? And they might not because time, but I think maybe the answer is somewhere different. Like, you pull back and go back to the beginning of what you're trying to do and design something for that.
Yeah. One of the things that you might see a game system try is to give you a status like exhausted, but then give you something that you gain when you are exhausted. So the ranger has an ability. When you are exhausted, you can also do this to sort of offset, as Dave is saying here, the penalty that it might give you. Okay, you're at -1 on all your checks. However, you gain this ability, which works in theory until you unbalance something somehow, so that now the ranger actually wants a level of exhaustion because they need this power to work. So they're outside running in circles while everyone else is camping because they want to be exhausted, right? So that's the sort of thing it's like, oh, this will be so great if we do this. One place that we've talked about and we've seen it work well as intended is the Alien RPG with the stress dice. Right?
Yeah.
It's a bad thing, but it can be a good thing, but it's most likely a bad thing.
Yeah, and to review, you get more dice, which means more chances at success. But these dice you're getting have a face hugger symbol on them, and if you roll that, you start doing bad things. Just like people in the movies start losing it, you will start losing it when you get those things. And so it becomes both an awesome thing, more chances at success, and a terrible thing, peril might happen. And that's great.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But
So
it works because of the particular mechanic of rolling lots of D6s. And so it all fits into it. You can't just be like, hey, roll this D20 with a face hugger on it for exhaustion, right? It's not as simple as that. But maybe you could, right? Maybe you could create a table that when you do a check and it would play off of exhaustion according to the DM, maybe you roll on the table to see whether something happens. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
It's complicated.
It's a great game design quandary that Dave brings up here.
Should be on the D&D hiring list, right? Design me a fix to exhaustion.
Yeah, exactly. Final question, because it relates to Shadow Dark, which we will be talking about in our main segment today. Kurt Ugle, 4576 via YouTube. In Shadow Dark's excellent game mastery section, which we will be covering, I loved the Pact, the whole core ethos section, and modes of play. Regarding the latter, I remember during D&D Next hoping that the DMG would have a lot of advice on modes of play, but we didn't quite get what I'd hoped. Do you have recommendations for a resource that discusses different modes of play? Do you have favorites? Chapter 9 of the current 5th edition DMG does sort of talk about that. There are ways to do different kinds of rests discussed. There are ways to do horror and ways to do madness and that sort of thing. So it's sort of there, but it doesn't quite break it down in a way that clicks as, okay, this is a mode of play. I know that the Grim Hollow campaign guide does some mode of play stuff similar to what the DMG did, in terms of dealing with curses differently, in terms of different rest mechanics. I know that I've seen over the years many game master advice blogs, streams, podcasts, where they do talk about these things and give some advice on how to change modes of play, but they're so widespread that I can't pinpoint one to say, check that one out.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, a game that does it really well is Night's Black Agents, right? So in Night's Black Agents, the entire book has little bits where it will put in a sort of, if you're running this mode or that mode, and I think it has kind of 3 modes, if I recall correctly. One of them is where like you have no agency support, so you've been burned and outed. And then I forget what the other one is, but there's another mode. But what it means is throughout the entire book, they have to cover these things. And while it's really cool, it's a lot of work. And if you imagine a game like D&D with all those supplements and all those adventures, well, do you really support them all? Or do you just leave that in the DMG and then abandon it, which is kind of what we see with Chapter 9's work? It's hard. And a lot of the answer to these kinds of modes of play is subsystems.
Yep.
And maybe D&D is smart in leaving it to other companies, where we see like what Grimhollow does, or we see like, the Cubicle 7 stuff with overland travel being a much more expanded thing, or systems like downtime that you can choose to lean into or not. Because it's hard to really do something like say, hey, you have hit dice, or hey, spells are not Vancian, right? Like it's not easy to do that, and especially not to support it beyond that. And I think that's what happened with 5e, with D&D Next, is when they were doing that playtest and talking about this being a great idea. It was a great idea. And once they tried to do anything around a deadline, they go, oh, yeah. No, we're not doing that.
Yeah. There was a lot of talk, not from Wizards, but from fans saying, oh, they're going to make these modules that you can plug in or take out. Oh, I want to run a OSR style 5e game. I'll plug this in or pull and I knew that this was never going to happen for the reasons we talked about. And one of the issues with these modes of play is it's fine to say, all right, DM, change the way rest rules work to make this a grittier game. But there has to be something on the player side too. Otherwise, it's just superheroes in a gritty game.
Yeah. Like to me, a great example is if you look at, there have been a couple of really neat, and this comes from thinking about Jared Rasher's recent excellent blogging. There have been a number of cases where D&D explored the character path concept, the life path, life history background. The Exandria book, I think it's the Exandria Wildmount, one of them looks at that. And there is Xanathar's has a section on it. And then you have the Cubicle 7 book, which is what Jared was reviewing. But if you look at those earlier efforts that D&D has done officially, they're neat. They give you good ideas for your backstory. But there's that second part of it, which is then tying it into the adventure and into your actual play. Like, your home was ravaged by ogres or whatever it is, and you have this goal of X, Y, and Z. Great. Now the DM has to weave that in, and there's nothing doing that for you, which is fine. Many DMs can roll with it, but the ideal part would be that next part that links it into the actual product. And that's the part that it's just too hard to keep trying to do that for every optional system you have. So it just falls on the DM to make it work. And that's, I think that's ultimately what gets to, I think, Kurt's question is, how modes of play really work. Well, the best modes of play are propped up by the rest of what you use. And maybe we talk a little bit about that in Shadow Dark with some of the suggestions they have, because I think it's somewhat similar. These are fun ideas, and you may use them as a sort of source of house rules, but they're ultimately not really supported by the rest of it, unless you do that work.
For sure. So thank you for those great questions. Now let's get into our news and commentary section, starting with the Adventurers League moving into D&D Beyond. Oh, Teos, we could go on and on about this in our vast experience with organized play, from the RPGA to Living Greyhawk to Living Forgotten Realms to everything.
How do you put everything in one place so everybody can get to it and know about your program?
Yep. So we've gotten there. Teos has in our show notes this nice thing: once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, there was a website for the Adventurers League organized play program. And then it moved to the D&D website at Wizards. And then it didn't get updated because people in the Adventurers League couldn't get a hold of the people that ran that site. So then they went to the Yawning Portal, which became even harder to find. And then it went to the D&D Beyond Discord, which was easier to find for some, but much harder to find for other folks. And now it's moving to D&D Beyond. There was a blog describing what the Adventurers League is, how to participate, and a link to the resources that are current for the Adventurers League. More articles are said to be coming, and we will hear about the future of this program, how to find this and other articles, uh, news, etc., etc. What was your reaction when you saw this?
So I'm very glad that there's something other than Discord, because you tell a lot of people to join Discord and they go, yeah, no, right? Or I can't keep up with it or any of it. And even though they try, like you can follow their news channel and stuff, there's still tons of people who can't find what they want. And there's a disconnect between an announcement on Discord and a file that lives there temporarily, and then that file actually ever being anywhere else that you can find it. So treating a website as the actual default, I think, would be great. The trouble is the blog disappears, right? Like, try to find the errata on Spelljammer. You got to go searching in the D&D Beyond blog area. And especially for somebody casual, good luck with that. So it ultimately needs to be pinned somewhere, as it was on the old D&D website. We need something on the D&D Beyond site that people know to go to, and that it stands out, right? If you're brand new, you were just at a convention or you saw a play somewhere and you want to find resources, oh, look, this is pretty clear to me and I can find everything. So I think that's the intent. Hopefully it does take place.
Yep.
And is kept up to date.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see that with this move, if there are plans now for more Adventures League content, which is a whole different topic. But we know we will be getting some new Adventures League content because a group from the Philippines called the Greasy Snitches has become the first international premier organizer for the Adventures League, which means they can create adventures for Adventures League play as Bald Man Games and Gamehole Con and Gamehole Publishing do right now. And the Adventures League is also inviting other international groups who are interested in becoming a premier organizer by reaching out to the admins on the D&D Discord.
Yes, that was the most hilarious part of this webpage is, we're moving all our information here. By the way, if you were interested in becoming a premier organizer in some other country, hey, go to the channel on the D&D Discord where the admins hang out. Mm-hmm. Okay. And, so first I want to say, like, this is great, right? Because recognizing other countries and the strong work they often do to organize is awesome. This is not the first time we've done that, right? We've had Living Greyhawk had regions such as Italy and the UK. 4E had regions in Brazil, recognizing the strong D&D play that was happening in Brazil. These haven't always been successes over time. It is hard, especially because often nobody is really truly administering and constantly reaching out because those people are too busy to do so. But I want to make it clear that I'm excited that this is happening. I like it that we're reaching out to other groups. We're trying to empower other groups in other countries. At the same time, AL is in a weird place where it has thousands of adventures and it's unclear that it needs more. So, if we're going to create a bunch of other groups doing what Baldwin Games and Gamehole Con do, I worry that's going to further devalue new adventures, make it so that people who write them aren't really getting paid much at all because they're not going to get many sales in the DMs Guild and so on and so forth. And it just creates a lot of glut of content. So I worry where this will lead while also wanting to see this recognition. I don't know that the recognition should come hand in hand with writing adventures as much as receiving support for the activities they're doing to bring in new players is where I would, but I'm not knowledgeable on this. I don't see it on the ground level. What do I know?
Yeah. Well, I think the Philippine group was big with creating these experiences, just like Baldman Games creates experiences through convention play and Gamehole Con through its convention. So I think it was a reward for that work. And when you do that work, one of the perks is creating content. But as you say, if you're throwing, a small pebble into the ocean of content, it may be great for you as that individual convention organizer, experience organizer, but it's not necessarily making any waves in the larger pool of not just Adventures League players,
Yeah.
but D&D players.
And is it a perk in that sometimes it can be a trap, right? If I say to you, hey, congratulations, Shawn, because you've worked so hard, you get to administer a whole region and come up with a whole storyline and organize authors and edit adventures and write them all and find art for them and layout and then publish them on the DM's Guild and earn nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Have I given you a reward or have I trapped you?
Well, yes, it can be a trap if you don't know what you're getting into.
I've never,
But it can,
every time I did it, I didn't know what I was getting into.
But it can be helpful if you understand your limits.
Yeah.
And you use the credit card that you're given in terms of being able to create this content legally, create this content. You can use it just for the means to the end that you're trying to get to. I want to bring new players to my show.
Yeah.
So we're going to offer this.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right.
It's possible.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's marketing.
Yeah.
It's marketing for Wizards.
Yeah.
And the Adventures League that you are getting allowed to do. And there's not necessarily a great deal of revenue that will be created by this.
Right.
At least in terms of sales of adventures.
Yeah.
Can you create experiences that will draw people in and maybe make you more money? There's the question.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But still, I want to make it clear. I am glad for the group in the Philippines, and I would be glad for others to also receive that kind of elevation while raising these cautions.
For sure. You read a book called The Fallbacks, Bound for Ruin. We had mentioned this earlier. There's the book. We had mentioned this. D&D and Random House were releasing a new D&D novel. You can now get it in bookstores, and Teos received an advanced copy. So tell us about it, Teos.
It's good. It's for folks interesting, curious about how dense it is. That gives you a feel for it if you're watching the video. It was a really fun read, honestly. I had hopes for it in that when I think about the D&D novels that I've enjoyed, they are things like one of the first ones I read was Spellfire by Ed Greenwood. And what I loved about that was not the big names and the big lore. Those things I actually found a little clunky to me. It was the stories about making a campfire and traversing the wilderness and being scared of it, or being thrown through a portal into a dungeon and having to deal with that. Like, that was the kind of stuff that I was like, yes, I deal with this. My character deals with this. And that gave me ideas. This book is full of that kind of thing, like cool ideas of the types of things that you deal with as both a GM and a player. Mm-hmm. It is not so simplistic that it's for only young audiences, but straddles, I think, really well. Both you could be young and enjoy this. It doesn't have, exceeding violence or sex or drugs or anything like that. So it's totally the kind of thing that as a parent you'd like to give your kid. But it is an entertaining story with meaningful stories and challenges that the individual characters are trying to get overcome. And the characters are all super interesting. It's a very diverse party, and a large theme of the book is sort of how can they come together to be a good group, right? And so we have like a bard tiefling, we have a half-elf warrior, female, she halfling, half-elf, that leads the group, wizard, cleric, and an audio companion. And they can have some really neat things, like the cleric, for example, and this is not a big spoiler, you see this right kind of from the beginning, is that the cleric doesn't just pray for spells, they bargain for them. And so they're reaching out to different deities every time to negotiate the casting of that spell.
That's funny.
Right. And a lot of the characters have this kind of something like a little hook like that, right? That's like an example of, hey, this is a great character concept that you could come up with just by reskinning and role playing. And so it's full of these kinds of ideas. So I think as a player, it'll give you great ideas on how you could bring a character to life, and how the backstory can play out over time. It's a very D&D tale. It's full of spells you'll recognize, monsters you'll recognize, locations like Undermountain, groups like the Zentarum, threats like liches, rust monsters, you name it. And it has neat ideas on things like treasure. So and little things like how the party splits up treasure and what they do with it and how it matters to them. And one of my favorites is there's a really cool example for treasure that they get that over time sort of unlocks and becomes more. It doesn't quite use the rules for Acquisitions Incorporated's franchise rules, but it could be inspired by them, or at least has some parallel concepts of how their kind of home base, which is also a magic item, evolves over time. And boy, if you're a DM, steal that idea, right? Take the franchise rules, take this concept of what's this magic item in here, that I'm going to avoid spoiling more than this, and play with that, because you could really just, I mean, that could be the centerpiece of a kind of the background of a really cool campaign. So I'd highly recommend it. There's a links to Powell's, but you can find that everywhere. It's out now. We got an advance copy. Thank you to Random House for that. Excellent novel. It clearly indicates that there could be a sequel, so I hope there is.
Nice. From the depths of fantasy to the heights of space, NASA has released a role-playing game, and you can write indie adventures using NASA material. So the space agency NASA released an RPG game called The Lost Universe. It is a free 44-page PDF that has a resemblance to D&D, but is not actually D&D. And the game is meant to teach science concepts during play. You can get this at science.nasa.gov and look at Mission, Hubble, Multimedia, Online Activities, The Lost Universe. And from Itch, we also have an Indie NASA TTRPG Adventures bundle. If you have any adventure for a role-playing game that centers on at least one image from NASA, you can submit it to the bundle, and you have until June 5th of this year to do that.
Pretty cool.
Yep. And more cool news coming from Kobold Press and Steamforged Games. Steamforged has a number of boxed products like the Epic Encounters boxes with minis, maps, and an adventure. Kobold Press has its new Tales of the Valiant game, and the two are going to join forces to create a starter set, box set for this new Tales of the Valiant system. Interesting thoughts, interesting concepts. Yeah. Two companies that are seemingly competitors coming together to make a product.
Yeah, I dig that. I mean, you don't often see this in our industry, and I feel like we should see it more, because this is a smart recognition of, hey, this company creates these box sets, has distribution deals all over the place. I see them in my gaming store, I see them in other gaming stores, I see them at conventions. So if you have that network and that capability, that lets us do something that otherwise would be hard for us, right? To go and contract some individual company in China and work this all out. No, you make it, right? I think that's really neat. And I hope we see kind of more like that from Steamforged Games or other companies. It's a smart move to me. That's cool.
We now have the SRD in Braille, thanks to Wormworks Publishing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Wormworks Publishing, we know Dale, who works there. They have focused on games that further inclusivity and accessibility, really in almost everything they do. Really impressive, and it's worth checking out their main website, just learning about that. But their latest endeavor is a free Braille version of the SRD. You can download the BRF and the BBZ formats of the SRD. Includes the Player's Guide, Game Master's Guide, Monster Manual, and Spellcasting Guide content. It is all open access, so it's released under a CC BY license for anyone to freely use and adapt. And there's a tutorial included which equips publishers and homebrew creators with the tools to convert their own content into Braille using free software. So would you like to create a free Braille version of what you have already created? Here's how. And the tutorial video on YouTube, you can find that all from the link below at Wormworks, WYRM, workspublishing.com. Direct link is in our show notes. I can also say that Wormworks has converted the Forge of Foes SRD and the Lazy DM SRD from Sly Flourish Mike Shea, to Braille. So stay tuned for that, and we'll have links for the Forge of Foes in Braille, which is really cool.
Awesome. And last but not least, I want to thank everybody who has backed Surviving Strangehollow. It went to Kickstarter Tuesday last week. We just topped 70,000, so thank you so much. You still have a few more weeks to back it. You can go to get.accidentalcyclops.com, which will redirect you to the Kickstarter. So thanks for your support. And if you're interested in new art, new rules for a strange, fanciful, deadly, cute, but weird and menacing world, head on over there.